Indeed, Egypt is full of mysteries, ancient and not so ancient ones. Most people think that the mysteries are how were the pyramids built and so on, but the very recent history of Egypt could be not less mysterious. For example, very few people are aware that the keepers of the pyramids were well and living 200 years ago when they were brutally massacred. And that is why only in the very recent past the pyramids started being used as a building material by the locals who wanted to build their houses in Cairo. But let's again start from the beginning. The people you see right now are not some Europeans, Slavic people, but these are indeed the original indigenous inhabitants of North Africa, the Berbers. Their writing is also very similar to the runes used in Europe. The patterns on the embroidery on their textiles is practically identical with those of the Slavic nations. In the past, they also knew how to build megalithic underground structures, exactly style Survivor, the one we see all over the world. The traditional outfits of the Berbers are very similar, if not absolutely identical, with the traditional outfits of some Slavic nations. What you see now are photos of traditional Slavic outfits, and if it is not the caption of the photos, I myself cannot even distinguish are they Berbers or Slavs. Despite the obvious connection between the Berbers and the people of Europe that even a small kid will notice, the people who wrote our textbooks preferred not to pay attention to this connection and to stick to the Scaliger version of history that these cultures developed absolutely independently of each other. People belonging to various races are depicted on the walls of the Egyptian temples. Most likely, in reality, the society over there belonged to various races as well. King Tutankhamun's DNA shows that he was a Caucasian person. I wonder how many of the other pharaohs they have tested. Egypt was either the main place where the survivors settled or one of the main places for sure. At this point, we cannot say for sure did they create all the Egyptian culture from scratch, or did they join already existing developed culture. People in those times were still somewhat in touch with their multidimensional nature and were regularly in contact with beings from other dimensions. So although the survivors were the bedrock of our civilization, in general, they were not the only basis. Communication with other civilizations was constant. A good example are the Dogons, who are a living proof connection with Sírius. Till nowadays, they keep advanced knowledge about Sírius that could not have been obtained by any primitive means. Indeed, till date, we are rediscovering with our science things they already knew a long time ago. Other example could be the story of the Anunnakis as told by Zachariah Sitchin. I don't know how reliable are his translations because some people see him take full passages from Blavatsky, passages of the story. But no matter if that is true or not, I see a tendency nowadays the terms Anunnaki and aliens to be somewhat used as synonyms, and I think that is quite a mistaken notion because there are much more parties out there besides the Anunnakis. And by the way, speaking about the various fractions of the other dimensions, I should mention that probably more than one party was involved in the ancient Egyptian culture and society. The people I call survivors are the good survivors, but there were other parties as well who also had advanced knowledge of technology, but did not have the original pure-hearted genes of the survivors. Those other parties were already poisoned by the lies of the parasites. Why I think so is the subject of another video series, so let's, without any further delay, go to the more scientific stuff, or at least many of the listeners will find it more scientific. It is not by chance that in modern Egypt it is forbidden strictly by law to dig the ground more than 5 or 7 meters, something like that, not more. Reason for this that over there things will be found that will expose the fabricated history of Egypt. Visited Luxor years ago, the local people also told me that most of the artifacts of ancient Egypt are still buried in the ground, and everywhere they try to dig, especially under the existing sites, there are many more layers underneath. However, excavation is simply not done. But still, uncomfortable facts leak out here and there now and then, like, for example, cemetery with some 1 million mummies. Very carefully, towards the end of the articles, the mainstream newspapers mention that many of the mummies inside were of blond or red-haired people, and surprise, 213 centimeters tall. As far as I understand, they actually closed this cemetery excavation. But some of the bodies were found some 30 meters below ground level. That is very deep for a burial. The burial is not extremely that old, as we can see from the stage of preservation of the bodies. And yet, how did this enormous landmass of 30 meters pile up above them? Even mainstream science confirms that Sahara turned from green to desert in a flash. It happened suddenly, and that made me remember a documentary, a mainstream history documentary that I saw years ago on a mainstream TV channel, where archaeologists were excavating villages that were swallowed by the desert in Egypt. The picture that their excavations revealed was pretty sad. People were laying around there as if frozen in their daily activities at the doorsteps of their homes, in the rooms, outside doing their daily activities. They were not buried. It really happened in a flash. There is no culture yet known to us of humans that left their dead to lay around there. They always buried them, and the fact that they were left like this means that the disaster struck suddenly and there were no survivors even to bury the dead. And as we delve further into this, very interesting stuff starts surfacing. A very simple question. There is a whole lot of sand out there in Sahara, really lots of it. How did it end up over there? Moreover, in a flash. We are being assured by the mainstream science that Sahara formed absolutely naturally, and they are telling us that with such a certainty, as if they were first-hand witnesses when it was made. And although that is certainly one hypothesis, another hypothesis about the arrival of the sand I simply cannot believe. So all this massive amount of sand just suddenly arrived over there in a flash, just like that, packed its suitcases and arrived by international flight, or what? Or maybe something more natural, like a river carrying it. All of a sudden, the river carried mountains of sand and dumped it there in a flash? Nobody has ever observed such a behavior on the side of rivers so far. Well, how about somebody kindly helping all this whole lot of sand to fall down and bury most of the culture of the first waves of survivors? After all, we do have a good record suggesting that somebody has been helping huge land masses to fall exactly on the centers of the culture of the survivors. Nimrud, for example, still lays buried under a hill of rubble that looks exactly like some sort of industrial byproduct or industrial product. Teotihuacan was buried under a couple of meters of clay mixed with other materials, but was everything around buried over there, or just the city? If large areas of Mexico are covered with this, then yes, it would be likely that this was the Great Flood or one of the Great Floods. But in case that this happens only selectively in the area of the city around Teotihuacan, then that is a completely different story. The Great Pyramid of Cholule is even a better example. Originally it was bigger even than the Great Pyramid of Giza, but now is in poor shape and poorly restored. The full pyramid is buried under a hill of clay, and the official explanation of that is that the Spanish buried it to build their church on the top. But what was the need to make up this story about the Spanish covering it with clay? It was not mentioned in any historic record of the Spanish or anybody else. Nothing else around there is buried under meters of clay, so we are having at hand, obviously, artificially made covering. The local legends say that this pyramid was built by tall people who survived the Great Flood, the Great Cataclysm, and sought refuge in foreign lands after that. And these are very few of the many examples of artificial burying, and I will point out a few more later on in this documentary, like for example the selective burying under some 2 meters of clay of a number of Russian cities where the culture of the survivors was present. The natural process by which the forces of nature grind the stones into sand takes many thousands of years. And how come on the maps that were made just a few hundred years ago we see the place where Sahary is now vibrant with rivers and lakes? Maybe the desert appeared or became so big as it is now not thousands of years ago, but in the very recent past. At this point, I wouldn't say for sure that this is so, but if that is true, it would certainly explain some strange structures that we see in the desert. For example, like this dam uncovered by a storm in the desert recently, with some sort of what looks like remains of buildings around it. Here are a few more dams from the area of Mar Salam in Egypt. They seem to be in a very good condition, looking quite new, yet they are on rivers that no longer flow. I'm not really sure if these dams are directly connected to the topic I'm discussing, but on the other hand, it seems unlikely that the current Egyptian government would have built them right there in the desert where there are no rivers flowing at the moment. So who built them and when? I couldn't find any information. Anyway, under number 9 in the links of the description of this video, there is a full map where somebody found strange things in the desert, and some of them could be relevant to the topic discussed, because they do not seem to fit in the modern infrastructure of the country of Egypt. Now, this is one interesting plateau in the Sahara Desert. It has a network, a mesh of lines. The distance between them is some, exactly, not some, but 300 meters. And it's, again, I'm not sure if this is relevant to the topic of the culture of the survivors, but it's very strange who and why would do this nowadays. It's something like the modern equivalent of the lines of Nazca. And the number of crater-like formations with perfect round shape also seems suspicious to some people, because they look exactly like the aftermath of nuclear bombing. For example, the Sahara Eye. Wikipedia gives all kinds of a version about its creation, and they are all natural. And the version that this is actually a result of a bombing is not even mentioned, although the rocks over there appear to have melted, and that is very typical for bombing craters. In general, I'm getting the idea that we see only the tip of the iceberg in Egypt, and most of the stuff is still underground. Something like what you see on these illustrations. Well, the buildings are not very Egyptian, but the idea is shown in a very nice way. Really, I don't know, were the medieval cartographers really that much spaced out to place rivers where desert was? What would be the explanation for this? The official explanation, I mean, they must have been smoking something. Maybe the drugs that the pharaohs had, the Egyptians had from America. But that shouldn't be the case, because we are always assured that everybody was evolving absolutely separately. It really seems to me that all these lies about all cultures evolving separately and closed without well-developed worldwide communications has been fabricated just to cover up the very existence of the survivors. Something like kidnapping the baby of a king and placing it to grow up in the family of slaves without telling him who is his actual father, and lie to him that he has always been a slave. Well, once the young prince somehow understands who is he in reality, he will start taking actions towards acquiring his rightful inheritance. Survivors were coming in waves, and the last wave that was in Egypt and were the last keepers of the knowledge and the treasures of the survivors were the Mamelukes. They were savagely defeated and killed in year 1811, and that gave a possibility for the modern historians with great authority and without any pangs of conscience to tell us all kinds of fairy tales about them. It is so easy when you just kill everybody, there is nobody left to object any story you fabricate about them. And when they were fabricating those fairy tales, they really let their imagination run wild, and this is how they are portraying the Mamelukes today. And this is what contemporary artists of that time saw with their eyes. This is 500 years old map, or a copy of it, kept in a museum in Nuremberg. The map depicts Constantinople, or nowadays Istanbul. We see quite an international crowd of ships, so to say, in this ancient city. Of course, we see ship with the Muslim flag, the crescent. Then there is a ship under the flag of the two-headed eagle, which has always been and is still nowadays on the symbols of many European countries. And the third one has a sphinx, the flag of Sphinx on it. Well, sphinxes have always been the symbol of Egypt, but why there is a Christian flag as well next to the sphinx? Let's look into this.